pleased to have Dr. Dykeman here with us. He has received his master's in counseling from the University of Washington and his doctorate from in counseling from the University of Virginia. He is a cum laude graduate of Claremont McKenna College, where he was an Army ROTC Distinguished Military Graduate. Prior to his work in higher education, he served as both an elementary and high school counselor in Seattle. As a counselor educator, Dykeman has worked at the University of Virginia, Eastern Washington University, Johns Hopkins University, and now Oregon State University. At the university level, he has served in the following roles: school counseling program lead, PhD program lead, counseling academic unit lead, instructional technology coordinator, program assessment coordinator, K-Correct liaison, associate dean for research, interim, and department co-chair, interim. Dr. Dykeman holds the rank of full professor and has published 2 books and 73 peer-reviewed articles and book chapters. In addition, he has served as PI in 2 federally sponsored grants. He has held the following professional service roles: the president of the Washington Association for Counselor Education and Supervision, the president of the Western Association for Counselor Education and Supervision, a member of the Counselor Education and Supervision Executive Board, a member of the Journal for Counseling and Development Editorial Board, a member of the ASCA National Program Standards Steering Committee, a member of the KCREP On-Site Accreditation Team, and a guest reviewer for the Journal of Latinos in Education, a guest reviewer for the School Science and Mathematics, and a guest reviewer for the Measurement and Evaluation in Counseling and Development. So I'm very excited to welcome Dr. Dykeman here today, and please join me in welcoming Dr. Dykeman, and I will pass the floor over to you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Gretchen, and welcome everyone. And this is just, I've been so excited to be able to be with all of you here today and just walk through a little bit about corpus linguistics. And so I'll give you a little background on it. And this is just a primer. I just want to give you a feel for what this methodology has to offer counselor educators and how you can possibly include this methodology in what you're doing. So let me go ahead and move this forward here. Okay, that looks great. And let me get my laser pointer going here. Great. All right, so how did I get into this whole thing about corpus linguistics and applying it to research in counselor education? And linguistics has always been a long-standing interest of mine. I did graduate work at the Flemish University of Louvain in linguistics. And then, in fact, since I left, both the Flemish and the French Louvains have become quite prominent in the field of corpus linguistics and doing great work in that area. So we'll go back to my dissertation. This is a article that was published in Psychological Reports that was based upon my dissertation. And you can see there that my focus was in linguistics, looking at the adjective correlates of working alliance. And so what I was interested in at that point was to look at what adjectives, the adjective checklist is developed by Harrison Goff, and he has a list of 300 adjectives. And so what people do is they check the description. So I had counselors check the adjectives that were that they felt described their client, and then I have them fill out a therapist version of the working alliance inventory on their client. And so then I was able to look at what adjectives appeared strongly with high working alliance and what adjectives appeared strongly with a low working alliance. So let's take a look here. I got to go down here to where it moves. Why can't it move here? Oops, there we go. All right, so this was the results from my dissertation. And what you can see here in terms of adjective correlates of working alliance, that the positive correlates were, and these were all at 0.01, were things that you would anticipate: affectionate, considerate, cooperative, friendly. So this gives you a picture of working alliance in terms of what does a strong working alliance look like. And so sort of how to think about this is that in medicine, you see a lot of journal articles on markers, markers of ovarian cancer, markers of pneumonia, and all kinds of things like that. And so what I'm trying to do here, and what I try to do with my students when I teach practicum and internship, is help them sort of develop an understanding of what are the markers for high working alliance and what are the markers for working alliances that are struggling. that are below adequate. And so you can see that. Now, what's more interesting is over here on the negative correlates and that's a point by zero correlation is what I did. The negative correlates, so you can see things that are exemplary of a negative working alliance or low working alliance. Argumentative, arrogant, boastful, cynical, defensive. And so you can see here in these that there's both sort of the overt confrontational working alliance rupture markers, and then you can also see some of the with evasive, sulky, you can see some of the withdrawal markers. All right, so that's how I got started in this, and my longstanding interest in the intersection of linguistics and counseling. Now, in the last few years, I've had some advisees sort of really interested in sort of content analysis, how to look at the content of a wide variety of things. And I ran into problems when we were looking at doing this in terms of thinking about, you know, how do you do content analysis and in a way that is psychometrically proper and coding and inter-rater coding and all that. And there was really struggles about that. And then I had other advisees that were really struggling with getting through the IRB. They really want to look at vulnerable populations and this psychological issues with vulnerable populations, and they just were struggling getting through the IRB. So all this sort of came together, and I started to think about, okay, what are some ways we can get at psychological variables and psychological issues in and not have to sort of work through IRB issues, and also, sort of get at what we're sort of thinking about. So what we did here is I sort of rediscovered linguistics and discovered actually a subfield of linguistics called corpus linguistics. And so what corpus linguistics is, I'm going to hide this screen here so I can, there we go. Okay, so what corpus linguistics is, and I'm going to hide this screen here too. All right. There we go. Okay. So what is corpus linguistics? Corpus linguistics is the study of language data on a large scale. The computer-aided analysis of very extensive collections of transcribed utterances or written text. So it can be both spoken language and written language is what the focus of corpus linguistics is. And one of the major people in the field, McHenry, is the source of this quote. And I think it's a pretty accurate quote and gets a good picture. There was another quote I encountered, and what is corpus linguistics? And it's a discipline that studies human language based on corpora. And corpora are large bodies of text. And I'm going to move this over here so I can, oh, there we go. I'm going to get rid of the chat here because it's getting in the way of my presentation here. So just one second. There we go. Okay. A discipline that studies human language based on corpora, large collections of samples of language use, and then again, textual data and spoken language. So both are possible. So like transcripts of psychotherapy sessions certainly can be analyzed using corpus linguistic methods. All right, so they have this field, corpus linguistics, and this methodology. Can it be used in counselor education? And so let's take a look at some of the things that some of my advisees and I have done in terms of applying this methodology to counseling. So certainly counseling processes in terms of looking at alliance rupture markers, looking at the language and seeing what are certain words, certain patterns of words that lead to our sort of hint at a rupture marker. Academic writing, looking at the subfield of writing for our counselor education purposes, and a number of colleagues and I have been looking at what is the nature of academic writing in counselor education, and what are the word choices they make, what are sort of the norms for languaging certain phenomena in counselor education. Psychological and emotional processes, psychological adjustment, doing personality assessment and threat assessment of written text or spoken or transcripts of spoken text. social cultural processes, and also the history of counselor education. How is counselor education and how it languages certain mental health issues, disorders, processes has changed over time. So you can see that there's a wide variety of applications of corpus linguistics. All right, so let's get a little bit concrete here. So here are some of the examples of, just some sample counselor education corpus linguistic questions. So like for instance, in text messages utilized in mental health disorder treatment, what is the use rate of linguistic categories known to be related to patient engagement and participation? And then these are some of them: authenticity, cloud, emotional tone, etc. And that's an example of sort of more of psychological process. Now we could look at academic writing. In counseling journals, does the use rate of boosters, hedges, and attitude markers and self-mentions differ between qualitative and quantitative studies? It's interesting about boosters and hedges in terms of academic writers. When you're reporting in the research your results, do you tend to boost your results? Do you tend to hedge your results? What is the ratio of hedges to boosters? Each field has a different ratio of hedges to boosters. And if students are novice writers don't get that ratio correct or near that ratio correct, they're going to struggle in their academic writing and getting their articles accepted at journals. But we have very little information on what is that booster and hedger ratio, and what are the practices about attitude markers and self-mentions in counselor education. Other things we can get at, and this is where we can get at vulnerable populations, but in an ethical way that's not, falls under the purview of any institution's IRB. So like, what is the NSSI specific content word use of individual posts? Do differences in specific psychological and physical processes exist among 12-step program literature? So there's just a wide variety of research questions that can be done. All right, let's move over here. Okay, key terms. Okay, so when I entered the field of corpus linguistics and really started to sort of look around at, what are some corpus linguistic methods that can sort of get at some issues that my students and I are interested in, I entered a world and a field and a profession that had its own language. And so I want to sort of go over some of the terms here because you're going to hear me use them throughout the day. And so just to sort of give you a baseline here. And again, my hope today is not to turn you into corpus linguists. I couldn't. That's not your academic background or desire. But to just give you a primer here and give you a feel for different corpus linguistics languaging methods and see if they might be of some use to you. So type. Type is the corpus linguistic word that means word. So when you read corpus linguistic articles or when you're writing up corpus linguistic methodology studies, type is the word is used for just a single word. And token is that. And then type is the nature of the word. So for instance, you might have like in a text, and I should have a text written up here, you might have 10 tokens, and the tokens might be unique words, and there might be 5 unique words. So some words are repeated over time. So token word, type is the unique word. Collocation, you're gonna hear a lot about collocation, and collocation means words that are mathematically associated with each other. In other words, within certain frames, like 5 words to the left, 5 words to the right. Does this word occur more often than by chance next to each other or within that frame? Keywords. These are words that are occur more frequently in a text or a corpus than words in a reference corpus. So you can look at 2 different, like 12-step literature, 12-step self-help manuals versus therapeutic manuals for OCD. And you can look at the differences between the two. Diachronic is looking at changes over time. Synchronic is looking at within a certain period of time concurrently. Lemma is all the different forms of a word. So like the verb to be, is, was, would all be in one lemma. A stem is just simply, like if you're going to have all the first parts of a word. So like you want to capture run, running, you would just use the stem run. N-gram. So n-gram, it refers to a sequence of words, a series of words, and n means number. And so there can be multiple types of n-grams. So for instance, unigram is just, would be a token, a single word. A bigram is two words together, that occur together. A trigram is 3. And then from that point on, you switch to just using the number. So 4-gram, 5-gram, 6-gram, and so forth. And with the n-gram, you can look at, are there certain n-grams, certain trigrams or 4-grams that are really common in the writing of a certain profession. And so it's a really good way to sort of get at how languaging is occurring in a particular field. Node is sort of the word of focus. So you have a node and that you would look at the collocations for the node. So that's a focus of a word. And finally, this is sort of a really major concept in corpus linguistics, and something that anyone who practices or uses corpus linguistic methods in counselor education needs to sort of really understand is register. So let's talk a little bit about register. But before we do that, I just want to give you, actually we're going to go to register and now go back to Firth in a second. Okay, so register. A register is a variety associated with a particular situation of use, including particular communicative purposes. A description of a register covers 3 major components: the situational context, the linguistic features, and the functional relationship between the first 2 components. Okay, so when in corpus linguistics, we're not just looking at solely words, but words within their situational context, because the situational context gives them meaning. And there are major registers that people study. Spoken, both formal and informal, and fiction, news, and academic prose. And then, of course, there are sub-registers. For instance, in academic prose, there's a sub-register of academic writing and counselor education. And what we know is that, and why is register important? Why should we even care about it? And it's really important because we know that fields are different. Just let's look at the use of verbs and nouns between general speech, between general writing, speech, and academic writing, and you can see it differs. So especially when you're thinking about doing a keyword study, you want to be able to sort of think about where, what is a keyword, and then what, the reference corpus. Is a reference corpus in the same register? So that's why register is an important concept. Well, let's go back here, because the other important concept that I would like you all to sort of get a feel for is the concept that comes from J.R. Firth. And you're going to see this cited a lot. And this goes a lot to why do we do corpus linguistics, and what does it mean, and why do we focus so much on words and how words group together. And so you can see this quote here, and he gives some examples of the use of a single word. And then he says, in these examples, the word ass is familiar and habitual company, commonly collocated with you, silly, he is silly, don't be such a, and all right. So what Firth says is, you shall know a word by the company it keeps. And so really what we're doing a lot of the time is we're trying to understand certain words, and certain very important words in counseling, by knowing the company they keep. All right. Skip there, skip there. All right. So what kinds of linguistic phenomena are studied? So there's a wide variety of things that can be studied. First of all, we can look at the frequency, just the pure frequency of words. And there are function, we can look at the frequency of function words, of stuff like that, content words, and parts of speech. How many nouns are used, verbs or nouns. We can look at n-grams. We can look at how widely dispersed across the corpora, or a text of writing, a word is spread. collocations, I talked a little bit before, keywords I talked a little bit before, and registers. And then we can look at all of these over time. There's a fascinating article looking at differences in introduction to psychology textbooks over 100 years. It's a fascinating study, so we can understand the history of our profession. Okay, so now we talked a little bit about, what, sort of the different approaches, but what data is studied? What do we actually study? Okay, and this is where it really becomes interesting for counselor educators. There are written text and written transcripts of speech, and there are some that are extant, and these are available for, out there for people, and they can go to them and use them to study. And some of the sort of form corpora that are out there, large, like the COCA, which is a corpora of contemporary American English, is 500 million words. So it's a large corpora, and we can get some look at some different processes there. The British National Corpus is another one. Or you can do self-constructed, and a lot of my students do self-constructed corpora, which works just fine. And written transcripts of speech, extant and self-constructed. And again, there's some spoken corpora out there that you can access via the web, and also self-constructed. And this is where you can look at sort of psychotherapy transcripts. And there's a lot of psychotherapy transcripts that are out there in the public, and that wouldn't involve, of course, the IRB processes, because they're publicly available. And then there may be transcripts that you have that are not publicly available and contain sensitive information, but you can go through the IRB process and study those as well. So I mean, there's tremendous opportunities in using corpus linguistics in counseling research, because you can just look at a very granular level what's going on in the interactions and in the languaging in the therapeutic dyad. So it's just really exciting. And I really sort of see corpus linguistics as a field, as a methodology, actually, in really sort of like where psychology was in the early 50s, as they started to apply in a very rigorous, psychometrically sound way, personality testing. And there was so much rich research that came out of like the MMPI research in the 50s and early 60s. And I really think that we're at that place again with corpus linguistic methods and counselor education, that there's questions that we can ask and questions that we can answer that just aren't possible outside of using corpus linguistic methods in our profession. All right. Corpus linguistics software. Okay, so this is a field that deals with language, and there's a number of ways you have to process language to get at all the different things that we talked about. And so I'm going to talk about some of the ones that my students and I use commonly. And ANCONC is one, and it's available on the web. There's no fee associated with it, and it's a very fine program. We're going to actually look at it and play with it a little bit later. The founder and creator of ANCONC also has AntFile Converter, and that's really handy because in fact, all of these programs prefer that you use text language that you want to study in a TXT file, just a basic TXT file. And so most often you have it in a Word file or a PDF or something like that. And so you need a way to convert it. And AntFile Converter is really handy with that. ANCONC and then in Lanxbox both do a lot of processing and can answer a lot of the research questions that you have. Again, available without a fee. And it also can do some graphing of collocations that are really handy and useful. Luke, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count, is a program that looks at psychological and linguistic processes in text. There's a fee associated with it. The fee is small if you are using it for academic purposes. And Wordsmith, which is another a very fine processing program. So all these programs are available and very, very user-friendly, useful. And so I'll show you a couple examples of things that during our presentation. Stats. Okay, we got to talk stats. You always have to talk stats. So there's a lot of different mathematical sort of approaches to looking at your, and answering your research questions in terms of proportional differences and association and word differences and register differences and fluctuations over time and usage of different parts of language. So all these things are looked at, and there's specialized statistics for this field. There's good programs online to be able to, and very user-friendly programs online to be able to do all these. Also, readily available if you're proficient in R. There's R code available as well. So sort of preset programs and R code is available, and so the statistical analysis are not a barrier. All right, one of the programs that my students have used a lot and I think is really handy and is very exciting is called LIWC, Linguistic Inquiry and Word Count. And so I just wanted to put over here some of the things that you can look at in text. And I want you to think about text not just in terms of books or journal articles or psychotherapy transcripts. I mean, those are certainly all areas that are possible. And you can look at things such as blogs and in different types of blogging. For instance, so a couple of my students have looked at blogging with that has occurred, and look at psychological processes active in blogging that's occurred on such things as non-suicidal self-injury websites and pro-anorexic websites. And so here are some of the, just a taste of some of the processes that can be studied and quantified. And you can look down the list. It's a wide variety. And this is just a few out of 90. All right, with LangSpox, you can do collocation networks. And it's very interesting here. You can see the node word, or sort of the word of focus. And you can see the interrelationships between the node words and the collocates. Because remember, what the idea is that you can understand words by the company they keep. And so with LangSpox, you can actually graphically represent the words that can be kept. So let's look at an example here. All right, so myself and two of my colleagues developed a corpora of random selection of counselor education articles from 2018. It was a large corpora. And I was interested in counselor education, in the counselor education academic writing, the STEM LGBT, so LGBT and then any other letters beyond that, that appears in a random selection of articles in counselor education. What are the words that are most associated with that word? In other words, what are the words that occur very close to that word? So in that, what we can get at is in counselor education, in a random selection of articles in 2018, how are people languaging? How are people seeing? What kind of connotations are they putting with the word LGBT in their academic writing? And so you can see that. Now the distance here is how close it is, how more common it is. So the words that are more associated appear closer to the node word that's here in the middle. So words like campus, community, students are very commonly associated with LGBT. And I did a 5 left, 5 right window here. So this is just an example of what you could do. You can also look at n-grams, and we're going to actually run a little of this. This is a right out of the same academic counselor education corpora that we did, and these are 3 and 4 n-grams, or trigrams and 4 grams, and you can see the common ones there. And this is really helpful for novice writers in the field to be able to talk to them about, okay, how do people language certain concepts in counselor education? And you can see some examples here. All right, I'll talk about a few references, and then we can get into some of the more practical aspects. Some of the key references that are very helpful if you decide that you're, I'm thinking I want to sort of pursue using corpus linguistics as a methodology. So Brezina's Statistics in Corpus Linguistics is very well done, and I would highly recommend getting that book, and he just lays out the different statistical analyses and how to accomplish them. If you're interested in Luke, I would highly recommend that you read, or it's available widely. It's a popular book for The Secret Life of Pronouns, What Our Words Say About Us. It's a great read. It's an easy read, and I'd highly recommend it. And then a couple of articles here, an article here that really gets at sort of the basis and all the things that you need to know about Luke on a more academic level. And then finally, just as a general introductory text to corpus linguistics, the Weiser text is very strong, very well done. So those are the references. And before I get into the practical, I'd like to just spend some time and talk a little bit about what your questions are, or you have research issues or research questions and you're thinking, I wonder how I could apply corpus linguistic methods to my research question or area of research. So I thought I'd stop share here and for a second, and then we can, I can field some of your questions and we can have a little bit of dialogue about that. So the floor is open.
Then everyone all jump at once.
Well, I'll ask you, Gretchen. This is not your methodology for your research, but if you were to engage in corpus linguistics research or add corpus linguistics to your portfolio of research methodologies, what would you think about doing in terms of your research interest in applying corpus linguistics?
Yeah, and it's funny because as you kind of shared that, I was starting to think in my head, and I was like, I'll volunteer to jump in first too. So part of just framing my interest of study is I work in higher education, specifically community colleges, with a broad range of students, and oftentimes a lot of the language used to talk about, especially community college students, is very deficit focused, focusing on underprepared students or focused on like socioeconomic issues. So I would actually be really curious to look at, in those articles, specifically talking about perhaps that population or just college students in general, what are the ways that we're doing research about those populations, and what kind of words are being used to describe students in those populations? Because I have a hunch that it wouldn't all be very positive and strengths focused, which does tie into some of the research that I am doing, but that would be my hunch, because I think we sometimes, especially in higher education research, can be very problem focused versus focusing on something else. So that would be my hunch, and it would be kind of cool to be able to explore kind of my avenue of research from a different perspective.
And so inadvertently or not consciously, some pejorative words are continue to pop up with certain populations, rather than looking at us or have a balance between the challenges and the strengths in those populations. So an overweighting in the pejorative.
Yeah, very much so. And I think if we think about our field of counseling as just very social justice oriented, I think corpus linguistics and what I've learned of it is really just that words matter. And I think it really, like that, the way we talk about things, the way we talk about issues, the way we talk about individuals, it can be impactful. So I think it can be an opportunity to kind of emphasize some other voices. So.
Okay. That'd be fun. I'd love to read your research in that area.
Let me just finish with my dissertation first, and then I'll have some time. Well,
other questions that people have.
So Dr. Dykeman, this isn't a question exactly. This is my first exposure to corpus linguistics. So I'm just thinking about, so I will be in dissertation next semester. I'm thinking about doing, exploring the relationship between cohesion on a faculty and gatekeeping. And so I'm thinking, as I'm listening to this, that it would be really interesting to apply corpus linguistics to how faculties talk about their work process, about each other, about their, experience of being a faculty, and to see whether there are words that are more associated with cohesive faculties versus faculties that have a low amount of cohesion. Does that sound like in the ballpark of?
Oh, absolutely, and it's very exciting. I'm just going through all these research questions that are based on your interest. There is a subfield in Luke studies that talks about linguistic style matching, and you can look at linguistic style matching of dyads, and that's where most of the research has been focused. Although they're looking at linguistic style matching within groups too, and the more it's basically a way to operationalize cohesion on a linguistic level. So, because part of doing your dissertation, the biggest challenge is always, how do I operationalize the variables that I, and measure, and actually in a practical way, the variables that I'm working with. And so I could see, if you got transcripts of faculty sessions as they went across, and you can look at the level of linguistic style matching as a proxy basically for cohesion. And that'd be really easy to do. And the great thing about it is you don't have to do any intercoder ratings, because it's all mechanical, because you're just running it through software.
You make that sound easy.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier than doing
much.
intercoder reliability, believe me. I've done that too. And it because you got to spend so much time training your coders.
Thank you.
So let me think about that for a second. So, I mean, there's definitely ways that you could, you'd have to go through the whole IRB process, but that you could get permission to transcribe. That would be interesting then to look at as faculty are having gatekeeping conversations, and look at, get transcriptions of those and do analysis of them. Are there certain words that when faculty are having gatekeeping discussions, are there certain words that are common? What is the languaging of that discourse? Wow, I mean, that no one has studied that. And what is the nature of the discourse that occurs in gatekeeping conversations? And when I was at ACES, there were tons of sessions on gatekeeping, but no one's really looked at a granular level on the process of how people do that, how people language that. Josh, I'm sorry, you're breaking up there.
Sorry. Can you hear me now?
I can, but it's still breaking up a little, but I can hear you.
Okay. I was just also thinking about
I'm getting an echo from you. Do you have two mics on?
Sorry, it sounds, I hear it as well. It sounds a little bit like there's some static. Do you have headphones available?
How about now?
Still not yet, sorry. Okay, if it's easier, I can also offer, if you want to type it in the chat, that's another option. Or if you have headphones, please feel free.
I want to go back. So what we were sort of discussing about your dissertation, where are you in the dissertation process in terms of forming your questions?
Me, I'm at the very beginning. I will just finish up coursework in December and take comps. So
okay. I'm
right at the very beginning of doing chapter 2.
Got it. I think that, I think that corpus linguistic methodology could be really handy for you, in terms of, if you're looking at, you've got the variable of faculty cohesion, you've got the variable, you've got the sort of the phenomenon of gatekeeping conversations, gatekeeping processes. And if you wanted to really sort of look at those at a very granular level, I think corpus linguistic methods would be very helpful. I think looking at them from a psychological processes that are going on, Luke, and then also sort of like the languaging processes, doing some type of collocation, using, and I'll show you in a bit, using LengthBox would be really, really, really handy.
And the books that you suggested, I wrote them down, but that's where you would start in terms of trying to do a deep dive and learning about it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Good questions. Good luck. Email me if I can be of any service.
Okay,
Be happy
thank you
to.
very much.
Oh, of course. Other questions people have, comments that they have.
Josh, did you want to try again? Josh, if the headphones aren't working, feel free to type it in the chat if
Great. Do other people have questions, comments, reflects, think, huh, I didn't get that, or I don't understand that, or can you give me an example of this? Well, seeing none, then for, you know,
I think I
what?
actually just saw Arian on
Oh, Arian,
unmute,
yes,
so I
go
wasn't
right
sure.
ahead.
Sorry, it just took me a minute. I'm dealing with a couple of different tech issues at the moment, but
Yeah.
so Cass, I guess similar to Gretchen's question, I'm interested in diversity and multicultural counseling, and I'm wondering about sort of the possibilities of looking at linguistic markers in academic writing compared to potentially other work that's been done like around social media. So to be a little bit more concrete, looking at the ways people might talk about members of the LGBT community from an in-group rather than an out-group perspective. So academic writing that's coming from an outsider perspective versus writing by members of those communities, and sort of looking at comparisons. And I guess what I'm wondering about is you offered some large scale extant corpora that are out there. I'm just wondering if there are maybe if there are repositories of corpus linguistics, bodies of work that folks have collected from social media or from other more, I guess, common media outlets that are not academic writing. So does somebody have a repository, or are you familiar with ways to access corpora that other folks have created?
Yes, there are large, and this is not an area where I've heard about it, but it's not an area where I've been doing my research, but there's large sort of banking of and corpora that from that of the internet, and I'll look for a couple of resources there, and I'll send you an email about them. But they are out there that sort of try to bank random selections of the entire web that are very large, and that you could definitely do social media research in that area.
Okay,
it'd be very exciting because how different communities are languaged. I was just reading an article last night in terms of in the American press, how are Saudi women portrayed? What is the languaging around Saudi women? Very interesting article, and looking at the collocation networks around that. So that absolutely, you can look at from both an inside perspective and an outside perspective, how are communities languaging who they are.
And then the other question I had sort of, Gretchen mentioned marginalized populations or sort of, college, community college students being described in sort of derogatory or stigmatizing terms.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking also about people living with substance use disorders or co-occurring disorders, and wondering if there are, again, sort of ways to look at either descriptors or, I don't know, but I have a sense that there are some bodies of work out there that describe, like you mentioned, psychological processes. So if there is a body of work or language that describes resilience versus a body of work that maybe describes struggle, and kind of looking at the ways that folks with co-occurring disorders are either empowered sort of indirectly by the language that's used, or increased in terms of marginalization.
Absolutely. And I was just thinking about that. It would be interesting to take a look at the collocations of, the word, substance, or the term actually, substance abuser versus schizophrenic. And are there more moral terms, more words that connote morality with one versus the other.
Mm-hmm.
Do we have a more moralizing, in the literature, academic literature or the popular literature or both, do we have a more moralizing stance with substance use and substance abuse than we do with schizophrenia? Or the opposite? I mean, we just don't know.
Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be great work to do.
I really like that idea because I know there's in common, in just common knowledge, there's such a movement away from the moral model of addiction, and yet in conversations, even with students in classes about people who use substances, there's such a moral valence to their language that I'm just wondering if there are ways to tap into that. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, very straightforward and easy to do. Yeah, I think that would be, I think it'd be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating.
I'm just going to throw an idea out there because it was just something I was thinking of as you were talking, but I wonder if almost like autobiographies or something like that versus like some sort of like other literature might be good, kind of corporate to use. So I don't know, that was just a thought that popped up.
Yeah, a number of my students are involved in studies that are using memoirs, and that's certainly very applicable, looking at those processes.
Yeah, great idea. Thank you.
Carrie, I'm curious, being a former Eastern Washington University faculty member myself, what's your area of research? And as you're sort of sitting here thinking about all this, what do you think, oh, maybe I could use a corpus linguistic methodology to get at this issue?
Well, I'm a play therapy researcher, so pretty much everything I've done is around play therapy. And one of the reasons I was interested in attending today was that I was at first thinking about a study to do, looking at kind of the processes of what's occurring in the relationship, and what caused me to really go about this is I'm currently in practice 1 day a week, and for the Coeur d'Alene tribe, and all my kids, whenever I'm making certain kind of responses in play therapy, like it's usually around encouraging responses, they all tend to respond the same way, like, yes, I did do it. And so this is what started. I first thought maybe I should do a content analysis on the transcripts. But I don't know where I am right now. I'm just taking all of this information in, but I think this could be really usable.
Yeah, I have one student who's a play therapist who's focusing on, she's going to use the corpus linguistic methods to look at play therapy, Adlerian versus other forms of play therapy, and look at the transcripts and see if, the differences between those approaches. So I think, I think there's a lot of sort of mechanical automated content analysis that you could do with play therapy transcripts. That would be very straightforward, very, very easy to do. Yeah, great. Fascinating too. I also have another doctoral student who's doing a corpus linguistic study looking at the languaging of children's books that are written by Native Americans. And we're going to take a look at, what are some of the unique languaging and some of the language processes that occur in that subgenre of children's literature.
That's wonderful.
Yeah,
That's a group very near to my heart, and I feel like we're not really writing about this group or talking about it much, and so that's wonderful.
And trying to understand what how the language is occurring there, and then that, of course, the implications of from an insider's perspective, the implications for counseling would be enormous. Great. Yeah, so I would think that this, given your research interest and given sort of the data that you would have available, I think this would be a really helpful process for, and efficient and interesting process for you. I would definitely take a look at some of the Luke materials, and I think that would be really interesting.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Other questions people have?
To try and jump in here. Am I better now?
Yeah, you're better. Sounds good.
Great. Carrie, I think you and I are on the same page. I'm a budding play therapy researcher, and I have some questions about parent stress and different language styles in describing their children. You know, as more stress they get, how might that influence the languages that they use, the words that they use with their kids?
Yeah, sort of markers of different stress levels. Yeah, yeah. What instrument are you using? Are you using Dick Avedon's parent stress inventory, or what? Yeah,
the parent stress index.
Okay, yeah, yeah. He was a professor of mine at Virginia. Yeah, that'd be really interesting. What are the sort of like adjective correlates, verb and noun correlates of higher levels of parenting stress? You know, so counselors could sort of begin to build a sort of a constellation of markers about, so that they can, when they hear in language, and hear that the parents are really stressed out. Oh, that'd be really interesting. That's a good instrument too. So yeah, I could definitely see a lot of applications there.
Good.
Yeah. Cool. What's your next research project?
For me?
Yeah.
That is my next research project.
That is, okay. What, because that's a broad area. What's sort of like something you want to drill down and really look at close?
Well, you know, there's quite a few things that I'm really interested in. I'm trying to make some tangible decisions about where to go next. My dissertation, I'm really interested in really practical things that clinicians can research questions that will really inform the way clinicians work, the way that play therapists will work with kiddos. And most recently, I've been looking at different variables of child-centered play therapy, like for instance, things that we tend to take for granted, like session length, and compare outcomes of differing session lengths to see if you know, that traditional sort of therapeutic hour is that based on anything other than convenience? And so I have this real need to answer some of those really practical questions, and I'm trying to figure out how this corpus linguistics might fit into all this, which again, I think like other folks is very new to me.
Yeah. Great. Yeah, I can see a lot of applications in terms of, you know, looking at and getting at a real granular level what's going on in terms of the discourse in the sessions.
Yeah, and also too, this just came up as I was listening to your presentation. You know, I'm really interested in theory, and particularly theory development over time. And you mentioned history. I thought, what an interesting thing to take a theory and analyze the changes of language over time, as you know, like person-centered theory, for instance. How, you know, we know as Rogers developed it, I mean, it was really it took a long time to, and there were changes and additions, and I know that the languaging around that theory has changed. And then also specifically, even more recently, how a lot of our clinics and community clinics are working from the medical that might be used in those situations. So a whole lot of ideas are coming up.
Yeah. Well, I have a student doing that. I have a student looking at changes in a couple of areas of the DSM and how it's from the DSM-1 to the DSM-5, to sort of the usage fluctuation.
Fascinating.
Yeah. All right, so let me take about a 5-minute break here, because what I want to do is I want to get things set up, because I'm going to run you through a couple examples. We're going to get really practical here. So I'm going to take a 5-minute.
Do you mind if I just jump? I think there's one question in the chat box.
Sorry, I didn't look over the chat box. Okay.
No worries.
Think about history. Can you differentiate between synchronic and dichrotic? Oh, great. I will show that. I'll do that right after the break. So I'll take a 5-minute break here, and while I set up the programs here. Alrighty, I got everything all set up so we can get practical. I thought we would take a look at Luke first. let's take a look here. So I'm going to go over to the this is the Luke website here. And they have a little, give it a try. And so you can get a little bit of a taste of this. And I'm just going to go over to the Gettysburg Address here. And so we're going to go down to the actual address. And I'm going to, can everyone see me doing this?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. And I'm going to copy it and then go right back to Luke and paste it in like that. And then we will hit it. Now, it asks for what register it is, and there's really not a register that's, because it's going to compare it against norms. They have norms for different things, and there's really not one that's super close, a public political speech. So I'll pick other, but that's sort of I would have to sort of tweak it a little more if I was going to do it in a full Luke analysis, but let's just hit it here. All right, so here's the Luke results on the Gettysburg Address, and it doesn't give all the Luke dimensions. There's 90 of them, but it just gives some of them here. And so you can see, and you can look at the data for the Gettysburg Address versus norms for all writing other than the writing that was designated there before. And so you can get a little bit of a sense of that. And there's a variety of different variables. There's some summary variables that they have as well. Analytic, the higher the score, the scores run from 0 to 100. Higher the score is, more logical, hierarchical. Lower scores is more informal, personal. Certainly captures a lot of the Gettysburg Address. Clout is on sort of persuasiveness, perspective of high expertise, higher score. That's very high in there. Authenticity, again, this is a political speech. There's a lot of confidence in that. Emotional tone, the warmer the emotional tone. 50 is about the mean. 50 is the mean. So over 50 is a more warmer emotional tone. Below 50 is a more a colder emotional tone. So that gives you some examples of Luke. Before I get off, Luke, any questions about Luke? Oh, I see I have a comment there.
Nope, that was actually just me. I just actually just popped the link in case anyone wanted to access the page.
Oh, thank you.
No worries.
Thank you. Great. All right. So that's Luke there. And again, if you purchase the Luke program, you get the full printout of it, which is multiple slides there. But they give you a little bit of interest there. And so, one of the things that you can think about over time, as a psychotherapy researcher is, what's the change in emotional tone over time? What's the change in social words? Is there more sort of social engagement over time? So yeah, that's sort of one possibility here. So I'm going to stop share here for a second. Great. So now we have NCONC here, and we can go up here, and I can go to a directory, and let's see here, Box Sync, and linguistics here, and Sarah. Corpus. This is our corpus of all articles for our random selection of articles from 2018 in Toto. And I'll just, let's go back one. There we go. And you can see how I can include them there. And let's just, out of interesting, run an engram. So you click that here, and you can go down here, run an engram size. And I want to look at 3 of 4. That's a common 3 trigrams and 4 grams. And I don't want one to just occur once. I want to up the frequency. Maybe 5 there. Okay. So the question I've asked myself is, and this will give you, in terms of like sort of lexical bundles here, what are common lexical bundles that occur in counselor education research articles? So I hit all that. And then I just hit start. and it processes the files. And it'll just in a second. There we go. So that's let me see here. How many did I get? I got 27,000. So that's a little too much. So I'm going to up at the 3 grams and start again. So you can get a sense of how this program works. There you go. And so these are some of the, the most common trigram in counselor education writing is as well as. And so it's sort of interesting. Questions, comments people have about NCONC? Different things you can do with it?
Maybe explain this, but what's the range column? Is
The
that in how
range
many different things it's found, or because I'm assuming frequency is the number of times it appears, is what would range be?
I've never used the range function above 1, so I'd have
Okay.
I don't know. That's a great question. I'd have to look and see what particular. I have some ideas of what they mean, but I actually honestly don't know. So I have to figure that out what range is.
That's okay. That's sorry to toss in a hard question. I think
No, I like
one,
those. Those are the not hard, but those are my favorite questions.
and I actually see one in the chat, so I'll let you attend to
great.
that one.
All right, let's see here. Chat, there we go. No, but interestingly, there was Pennebaker himself did an article looking at applicants to college, and then looking at their application essays, and did a Luke study of the application essays of who were eventually more successful and who were not. So there's been a little bit of work using Luke in the admission process, but no one's done it in terms of the gatekeeping process. And I think it would be just a tremendous assistance and boost to our profession if someone would do that. I think that would be just a really exciting avenue of research, especially since there's so much interest in, understandably, in gatekeeping in our profession. I think that would be a really strong avenue of research for somebody, mixing the counselor education focus on gatekeeping and applying corpus linguistic methods. I mean, that could be someone's career, and an important research to be done. Questions about? Yes, go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm just going to jump in because I just Googled and answered my own question, but the range is the number of files in which it appears.
Okay, dispersion, okay.
And that, yeah, which makes total sense, because I was wondering, because I noticed for race-based trauma, the range was only 1, but it was 123 times. So I was curious about that. So that kind of makes sense, that it shows up in one article 123 times, whereas some of the others really cross over a lot. So I just want to toss that in for anyone.
Awesome. That's great. Yeah, and because dispersion is important. Because if something is just in one article, then you want, and there's certain levels of dispersion that you want before to sort of consider something as a real important structure in languaging it. All right. Other questions people have? These are great. And you can speak up in the chat or chat away, or you can use your mic. Either way.
Dr. Dykeman, how big is the corpora, by the way, for your 2018 article?
Let's see here. This one is total number of tokens is 103,000. So it's 103,000 tokens, 103,000 words. And the number of types of words, unique types of words, is 10,000. Good question. All right, this program is very straightforward, very easy to use. There's just a wealth of things that can be done in it. You can also do things like a word list. So you just wanted to know just what words most commonly used. And then you can just run that 25,000 times. The word "the" appears. A lot of these words are sort of function words. You can also get content words too, and there's ways that what NCONC could filter out Function words, there's a list of common function words that sometimes people filter out, stop words. But yeah, participants, that makes sense in academic research articles, you know, content word there. Study, that makes sense. Yeah. Research. Counselors, counseling. So that makes sense as well. So there's a wide variety of things that NCON could do. It's a wonderful program. All right, so let me pause share here for a second, and let me go to the last program we're going to take a look at today. All right. There we go. All right, so now let me share my screen. And LangSpox, there we go. All right, so this is LangSpox, and this is a program that comes out of the University of Lancaster in Great Britain. And I have loaded the Corpus counselor education articles that we developed here at Oregon State. And let's do a graphical. Here, great. So someone give me a word within the counseling profession that you would be interested in seeing, you know, what words hang around that word. Anyone give me a word. You can do it in chat, or you can just hit your mic and do it.
I see empathy popped up.
Empathy, okay, great. That's an interesting one. And I think I will also do play therapy too. We'll do a couple here.
Yeah, I think Josh suggested the empathy, so I can't take credit for it.
All right, so these are the words that commonly occur around empathy in counselor education literature. And we can screen it a little more. So like we can do things like we can change the statistics of it. Mutual information is a common statistic. Actually, we're going to do DICE because you can do directionality. So we'll apply DICE. Okay, we're going to change that graph. And let's see here. Thresholds, those thresholds are fine. Okay, apply. Okay, let's run this again here. All right, so that directionality, that's a little too overpopulated, so we can back off that. Try a little bit different stat here. See if we can get it a little better, get a little clearer one. Okay, great. This one's really, I think, the most helpful here is the because you can see the words that are closer are the words that are that occur more commonly. Interesting. You know, we're talking about gatekeeping, talking about professional dispositions. Dispositional is very close to the empathy. That's really interesting. Now we can build a network here of collocates. So we can click that. Great. And there you can see the collocate network between empathy and dispositional. Self-efficacy, state, counseling. Yeah. So you can see between disposition and empathy, you know, what are the words that people think about, or write about, and how do they language the connection between those two? So those are some of the possibilities. Just out of curiosity, let's do play therapy. Since we have two play therapists with us. All right, let's clear this and we'll do it. Oh, okay. So any reaction to this from any of our play therapists about the languaging of?
I just wasn't surprised to see child-centered right below it.
Yeah. So, you know, you think more about an X-Linean approach or something like that, yeah, versus an Adlerian. In the discourse, it seems that theoretical approach seems to be, you know, what occurs, but you don't see the other play therapy approaches. Interesting. Group, that's interesting. I don't know, this is not my field, CCGPT. I don't know.
It's child-centered group play therapy.
Play therapy, okay, okay, that makes a lot of sense. Courses, okay, yeah.
Just interjecting, would it be like a piece of research to like find out, because this is specifically from 2018, so would it be like something to look at what are those co-located words like and how they differ over time? Because I think someone had kind of suggested that chronological piece before. Would that be something?
Oh, absolutely.
Because that seems like it would be really interesting.
So you can see how the colloquial network sort of builds up here. All right, we've got just a few minutes left here. So what I have done is I have walked you through all the different sort of basic terms and some of the basic concepts of the methodology. And we looked at some of the popular programs in this area, and we've sort of kicked around sort of applications. So it's just sort of basically, you know, we've got about 7 minutes left. Time to just sort of open the floor, questions, comments people have, things they've been thinking about, you know, like, oh, I'm really interested in this, but I can't figure out how to apply it.
I think I just want to say something, Dr. Diamond. Just thinking about all the applications of this, you know, corpus linguistic, as I was hearing and as I've been using some of those components, I was thinking about exploring the discussion posed of in courses of multicultural and social justice, and see the language that they use. I can see, obviously, when I'm grading, when I'm reading, I can see connections in self-awareness and exploration, but I also can see that, you know, acceptance and rejecting and trying to turn everything into something that's good when there's clearly injustice. And I'm kind of curious if there's the language to identify those differences in the pose. So I just was, you know, just brainstorming out there. So that was one that keep in mind. And the other one was with Twitter. As we have a president that uses Twitter a lot, I was thinking like the language that he uses towards, you know, is it denigrating language towards a different population? How is that connected? How does that affect our field of counseling? Because we support the population. So we work for it. So I just,
my mind's just exploding with possibilities there. I mean, the one is that we know over the course of time there's a lot of emotional turmoil that occurs when students are taking a multicultural class and they encounter a lot of the racism and that they've held in themselves that they haven't been aware of. And so there's a whole emotional process that goes like that, but we haven't really looked at that at a granular level. There has been a lot of research in corpus linguistics looking at the linguistics of course discussions, threaded discussions in courses, online courses. I mean, there's a lot of research on that. And so there's some good sort of examples of that. But, you know, to track that week by week, you know, does it start with a high levels of anger And then, does that recede? Does acceptance? I mean, all the different variables, and what is the course of those over what can an instructor anticipate is the sort of the normal course of those over the course of a quarter? I think it'd be utterly fascinating, very helpful, and really exciting research. Yeah, and there's ways to sort of look at usage fluctuation of different terminology over time too. Wow.
Yeah, I'm curious.
Amazing. Because you can look at it, you can actually, there's a program where you can actually graph the usage changes over time. So, graph the usage changes of like anger over time, or, contentment, or, or just the emotional tone over time would be fascinating. Wow. And important, because we don't have any idea about that.
Yeah, the real application, what they're going through. We have the theory, we have, the stages, we talk about those, but really hearing it from them, what's coming out.
Right, does data match the theory? And we have no idea right now.
Yeah,
it's all there. It's all there textual, right in their posts. Yeah. Wow, that's exciting.
Lots of opportunities. Thanks for the presentation. Yeah.
Any other questions? We have 3 minutes left.
These are your last moments to get out those burning questions. So feel free to chat them in the box, or just unmute yourself.
And the other thing is, where I am in my profession now, my number one priority is to assist new researchers in counselor education. And so whether you're part of OSU or not part of OSU, if you have questions about, gosh, I think maybe some corpus linguistic methods would be a great methodology to sort of tackle this issue or this research issue or something, but I'm not really sure how to do it. Just email me and we can, discourse back and dialogue back and forth. And I'd be more than happy to. That's my number one priority here for the last 6 years of my career, is to, help the next generation of counselor educators to sort of launch into the profession and look at methodologies that are real world. Because that's the thing about corpus linguistics is it's looking at real text. This is not laboratory produced text. This is just text that occur in natural settings, and we're trying to understand what's going on in it. So, and that frankly is really counseling. Counseling is discourse that occurs in a natural setting, and we're a language, even with play therapy and art therapy and all the different modalities, there's still a language component to it. So it makes sense that you looking at language is as part of understanding what's going on in the counseling process. It could be useful.
So, with that, kind of looking at our time boundary, we'd like to thank Dr. Dykeman just for his time and his effort in putting together this presentation. I really hope it's given you guys some things to think about and just some exciting kind of avenues for your own research.